Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a podcast focused on African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues, which is produced as a collaboration between the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa and Amani Africa Research and Media Services. Once again, this is Zion from Amani Africa. My colleagues Hani and Praveen are joining me on today's episode of our podcast. Hello, both.
Hi, Sion.
Hello.
All right, thanks both for joining this episode of our podcast. So as we all know, Morocco has taken over the role of chairing the Peace and Security Council for the month of February. The program of work, which has been adopted under Morocco's leadership, seemed to be quite packed initially, but of course we now know that it has been revised. We will reflect a little bit into this revision of the program of work and what it now encompasses. But before we delve into the details of February's program of work, why don't we just briefly reflect back to PSC's engagement during the previous month, and perhaps capture some of the major changes that were introduced to the program in the course of the month, as we have seen. So yeah, please feel free.
Thank you, Tion. Yeah, one key session that stood out in January was the emergency session held on the 17th of January on the situation between Ethiopia and Somalia. The PSC session, not initially planned, had been called in response to the escalating tension between Ethiopia and Somalia following the signing of the MOU between Ethiopia and Somaliland. Yeah, now this MOU grants Ethiopia sea access along Somaliland coast, and Somalia views this agreement as a threat to its territorial integrity and has taken diplomatic actions seeking intervention from the AU and the United Nations Security Council. Yeah, and you can also recall that the primary contention, the primary point of contention was the potential recognition of Somaliland as an independent state by Ethiopia. This development has further strained the relations between Ethiopia and Somalia, prompting Somalia to express its readiness to defend its territorial integrity and seek support from regional and international allies. Yeah, so we can also remember that IGAD called for an extraordinary summit to address this situation, but Ethiopia indicated that it's unable to attend due to short notice and prior commitments. And furthermore, regional and international bodies, including the AU Commission, European Union, IGAD itself, also Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Arab League, have also issued statements emphasizing the importance of respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty. Yeah, so the situation poses risks of armed confrontations, and which will have implications for the ATMIS, where Ethiopia is a major troop contributing country.
Yeah, that's true.
Additionally, there are concerns that the MOU and resulting tensions could be exploited by the Al-Shabaab for recruitment and attacks. So this PSC session was timely, as it aimed to address this complex development within its mandate in maintaining peace and security in Africa. Thank you, Tion.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Praveen. Hani, maybe if there's another interesting session.
Yeah, in addition to the session on Somalia and Ethiopia, another critical session that was not envisaged in the original program of work in January was the session on the revised AU post-conflict reconstruction development policy. Right. This comes at a critical time, given that this policy will be considered at the permanent representative level and executive council level, and eventually at the heads of state during the summit. Just to give you a brief background on what necessitated the revision. It was the last AU summit and the PSC session in November 2021. And that was along the lines of the need to ensure the PCRD policy is more in alignment with continental security dynamics. Two aspects in particular. One, looking at the increasing threat of terrorism, and the second one being the role of climate change and in peace and security. So those are two aspects that were not considered in the original policy. Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, the other reason is reapproaching the PCRD in a non-linear manner and focusing on a holistic approach of post-conflict, not only looking at post-conflict mechanisms, but looking at conflict, pre-conflict, during conflict, and post-conflict, as well. And as a result, they also want to reflect that in a name change of the post-conflict reconstruction development to the AU peace-building reconstruction development, so that it's not focusing only on post-conflict issues. Other reasons why there was a revision was to add 2 additional pillars, one looking at youth and peace and security, and the other one around environment and peace and security. Okay. So the need to integrate the role of youth and environmental security in a gender-sensitive approach to PCRD. More technically, the session addressed the need to revitalize the task force for PCRD and the PSC subcommittee on PCRD, in addition to the Cairo Center that was launched last year. And the session also looked at financial means and the funding challenges that come with mobilizing resources. And so they've discussed ensuring to mobilize resources from African private sectors, development partners, and other international financial institutions, including the UN Peace Building Fund for predictable and sustainable funding for PCRD efforts.
All right, so thanks both for that look back. So now that we have a little bit of an idea of what transpired during the last few days of January, looking ahead, we have 7 substantive agenda items that are planned to be considered by the Council during this month of February. So this is according, of course, to the latest revision of the program of work. As I was saying earlier on, there was an initial program of work that was adopted by the Council during earlier weeks. And this earlier version, of course, envisaged about 12 sessions, which seemed a little bit unrealistic considering that we also have the summits going on during this month. But, you know, some of the sessions that have now been removed from the revised program of work, including, you know, the informal consultation with countries in political transition, also updates on specific country situations such as Gabon, Sudan, and Central African Republic. I think these were very engaging and pertinent sessions. So, of course, hopefully the PSC will be discussing them in upcoming months. But having said that, we now have, as I said, 7 substantive agenda items that are to be considered during the month. I don't know, maybe I could just walk us through the first agenda item, which the Council has considered just today on the 6th of February. So this agenda item initially was planned to take place on the 1st of February. It then later was postponed for the 6th of February, and it has taken place today as we record this podcast. So this session is essentially focused around transitional justice and post-conflict peace building. So, you know, as can be noted from Hani, what you've just mentioned on your reflections of what transpired in January, the PSC seems to be placing quite a bit of attention and interest around you know, peace building efforts, post-conflict reconstruction and development. And also, I've seen a session on reconciliation, I believe, which took place on the 30th, or was it 31st of January? So it seems to be an area that's gaining increased attention of the Council. This is, of course, to be commended, given the relevance of such efforts, especially in specific country situations across the continent. We all know that AU already has a very comprehensive policy on transitional justice in particular, you know, which encapsulates the core principles which are relevant for justice and also reconciliation in post-conflict settings. Not just that, but, you know, the policy, I believe, is also very relevant for addressing underlying root causes of conflicts. So the importance is, of course, a given, it's granted, but the problem is around the full realization of this policy within the context of relevant country specific situations. So we do see that there are some efforts currently underway to ensure adoption of this AU transitional justice policy by AU member states. One example is the initiative which has recently been launched through AU's collaboration with the European Union. Definitely an encouraging step and something that requires to be fast-tracked. One important aspect, aside from looking into current initiatives to realize the AU transitional justice policy, one important aspect that may receive the PSC's attention during this planned session, which they just had today, could have been maybe the experience of specific member states. What kind of processes are being carried out in contexts such as Ethiopia, for instance, South Sudan, of course, and also what kind of lessons could be extrapolated from member states that already underwent relatively more successful transitional justice processes, such as Gambia, for instance. But just to say a few words in terms of outcomes, one key outcome we may expect as a conclusion of this session could be, an emphasis on the importance of proper and also regular monitoring and evaluation of transitional justice processes and their implementation. And in this respect, it may also be really important, to highlight the kind of role that civil society organizations can play by being mobilized on the ground and following up very closely on what is transpiring. So, this is one engaging session which just took place today. But if you guys could also jump in and walk us through some of the other sessions that will be taking place in coming days.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, the upcoming session, which was initially supposed to be on the 7th of February, is now on the 8th of February. And it's an ambassadorial session on health security and the promotion of peace and security on the continent. This session aims to reflect on the limitations of security-focused strategies, which fail to take into account the various factors that impact peace and security, such as health insecurities and the pandemics that we have seen previously. And in previous sessions, the PSC has convened and discussed various aspects of health, peace, and security, including public health threats and pandemics, given that the continent has seen the impacts of Ebola and COVID-19 as well. And building on these experiences, the upcoming session may assess the interlinkages between health and security, pandemic preparedness and responses to humanitarian impacts on health crises, and international collaboration and partnership with this regard. And this also provides an opportunity for the PSC to address the protection of healthcare facilities, specifically looking at ongoing conflicts such as the case in Sudan, the protection of professionals, humanitarian assistance, and other healthcare facilities that have been under attack during ongoing wars. So this is a chance for them to have a look at that. And beyond this, I think this is a session that features within the framework of Morocco's chairship, an overall focus that looks at demonstrating the nexus and the linkages between peace and security and other concerns, with central purposes of drawing attention to the importance of a holistic approach to matters of peace and security. The session also aims to discuss where Africa is in present time, as talks of a new pandemics are rising around the world, like you guys have mentioned, disease X. What are the potential new outbreaks, and what does it mean for the continent? And the session is expected to see participants from the Africa CDC and the AU HHS and AFCON as well.
Interesting, Hani. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Hani, for that overview. And on 21st of February, the Peace and Security Council is expected to convene a meeting on peace, security, and development nexus, which will be a follow-up on the Tangiers conference. Yeah, so this is in accordance with the conclusions of the Tangier Declaration, which was adopted in 2022 during the 1134th PSC session, and in which the PSC was urged to consider convening an annual council session, generally to give an update on the implementation of the recommendations of the declaration. Yeah, and this is ahead of the 37th ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, which will be held in February this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Praveen. The other session that I would like to cover for the month of February is the PSC session on the 23rd of February, where they will address fighting against terrorism and violent extremism. As we have seen in 2023, this took up most of their time.
Yeah.
And it looks like since it's one of the few sessions in the beginning of the year, this might be a center of focus for the PSC moving forward as well. And key outcomes from previous session that may be featured in this session include the need for resource mobilization for the Africa Center for the Study of Research on Terrorism. Given that there was a recent meeting by the AU Peace Fund Board of Trustees ahead of the AU Summit, the AU chair may provide an update on the allocation of the 5 million USD that was announced from the AU Peace Fund, and whether these funds will be allocated towards countering violent terrorism and extremism. And the other point of focus might be the increasing the capacity, the technical capacity of the Africa Center for the Study of Research on Terrorism through the establishment of the AU Ministerial Committee on Counterterrorism and the Coordination Task Force and the operationalization of the PSC Subcommittee on Counterterrorism. This is also going to be a session ahead of the during the summit as well. So that's something that they will be discussing.
Okay.
And in addition, the PSC took a key decision that during the last session that they had on counterterrorism that aims to look at a holistic approach to addressing the challenges of terrorism and violent extremism.
Okay.
And in that regard, they had established an annual roundtable as an alternative approach to counter and prevent violent extremism. So this session may address the process of the annual roundtable and identify a pathway towards hosting that roundtable in the upcoming months.
Thank you for that, Hani. Yeah, moving on, there's also a session on the fight against the use of child soldiers on 27th of February. Yeah, on the initial program, the session was held to mark the International Day Against the Use of Child Soldiers, which was scheduled for 12th of February.
Okay.
Yes, this meeting presents an opportunity to examine the prevailing trends across the continent concerning the recruitment and the utilization of child soldiers, as well as to address the challenges encountered and the progress achieved in the prevention of recruitment of children. Yeah, in addition, it is expected that the session will encompass discussions focused on assessing the current efforts being undertaken by the African Union Commission in preventing the use of child soldiers in Africa, as well as to share successful practices and initiatives in demobilizing and rehabilitating former child soldiers and identifying areas for enhanced collaboration and coordination among major stakeholders. These are the member states, the RECs, RMs, and other relevant stakeholders, as well as it will be an opportunity to explore strategies to bolster advocacy and generally raise awareness about the plight of the child soldiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is also noteworthy that during Morocco's previous chairing of the PSC, this theme was also included in the monthly program. And it is expected that the upcoming session will build upon the outcomes of the 1105th PSC meeting. Furthermore, the session will also draw on the discussions from the recent PSC ministerial and high-level open session on the promotion and protection of the rights and welfare of children in situations in conflict, which took place on 4th and 5th December 2023. Yeah, and which resulted in the adoption of the Banjul conclusions.
Okay.
Yeah. Going on, the second agenda item on the in accordance to the revised program of work It's the political situation in South Sudan. Yeah. The meeting, although was initially planned for 29th February.
Okay.
Yeah, as we know, South Sudan is scheduled to hold general elections at the conclusions of the transitional period, which is late in the year, in December 2024. However, a recent report by RJMEC, which is the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, suggests that due to inadequate funding for the unification of the necessary unified forces, the NUF, and the ineffective functioning of key agreement mechanisms and institutions such as the National Elections Commission, the National Constitutional Review Commission, and the Political Parties Council, the country is likely to continue facing challenges in implementing the revitalized agreement on resolutions of conflict in the Republic of South Sudan. That's the RACS. And this in turn is expected to impact on the upcoming elections in December. It's a no-brainer. So furthermore, the humanitarian situation in the country remains dire, exacerbated by the conflict in the neighboring Sudan, which has worsened the existing crisis. Also, you can consider the intercommunal conflicts and the influx of Sudanese refugees and South Sudanese returnees seeking refuge in Sudan have further strained the humanitarian support. So this convening will provide an opportunity for Council to receive updates on these pressing issues. Hani, what do you have?
The last session of the PSC will be held on the 29th of February, and it will be the only ministerial session. And the session will cover connectivity, the path to strengthening peace and security in Africa.
Interesting.
So this session, again, aims to bring to light the interconnectedness of peace, security, and with development, migration, technology, including AI and the latest technological advances, as well as infrastructure, health, governance, and agriculture, so more of a holistic understanding of peace and security. Building on that, the session aims to demonstrate the approaches that look at peace and security in isolation tend to be insufficient and addressing challenges. The session also aims to urge the AU and Africa at large to catch up with the rest of the world and how it deals with emerging issues which impact the continent's peace and security issues. Specifically, the session will look at goals of Agenda 2063, particularly Aspiration 7, which looks at Africa as a strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think, definitely very interesting sessions. I particularly find it very important that the PSC aims to look into how various factors are interconnected to impact on peace and security, and that we need to have a more holistic way of approaching peace and security concerns on the continent, and also having a more strategic approach of, responding to peace and security concerns. So that was very engaging and interesting sessions that we have highlighted in today's podcast. So again, thank you both very much for joining this episode of our podcast. So I think that brings us to the end of another episode. We wish Morocco a very fruitful month as it takes the chairship for February. We also wish everyone taking part in the work of the Peace and Security Council productive discussions on the important topics that have been outlined here today quite briefly. We are happy to encourage our listeners to dig deeper into PAC's agenda, as well as the analytic work that we produce. As always, Amani Africa is also very appreciative of the partnership and support of the Australian Embassy in the production of our insights on the provisional program of work of the PSC each month. And we believe that this podcast is a very useful accompaniment to our work. Before we go, as always, we'd like to wish the following African states happy National Days of Celebration in February. We have Gambia on the 18th of February and Arab Republic of Egypt on 28th of February. Let me also thank our listeners for joining us for this month's edition of Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast, a collaboration between Amani Africa and the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa. We hope you have a great month and a productive year. We will be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for March 2024. Until then, goodbye. We wish you peace and prosperity.